Okay, I've had a few people ask how I am and why I am doing these socketed pins for the shoulders on these Cerastus Knights. The basic reason is I want these arms to be removable for my client. I want it to be relatively easy to transport the knights, and for the most part, that means magnetizing. Unfortunately, also want these to be fairly dynamically posed. Um, it's pretty easy to just slap magnets in there and stick some arms on. They'll hold, they'll be fine for most of the gameplay, but I didn't really want that to be how this worked, and I wanted to be nice and secure and durable. So I'm doing magnets and some socketed pins. Now, I use socketed pins like this anytime that I am going to have at least now I do. I didn't used to. I've learned a lot in the last handful of years in doing this, but um, try and use these anytime I have a joint that is going to be holding weight and put in and out a lot. So these go in the side. They're getting they're bearing weight in this direction, and so they need the pins so that this doesn't just twist off and fall off and not hold. So basically, all they are some brass tubing that fits some brass rod. So this is 1/8" brass rod and whatever the size tubing it is that will hold an 1/8" brass rod. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. Sorry. It's when you're buying your rod, just take it over to the tubing section and find one that it fits in. That's the correct way of doing that. I've built a Phantom with stuff kind of like this, and I used big, giant, thick tubing for a bunch of the stuff, and it's the same process. It's just a bigger piece. So you will need a drill bit for both sizes is good, but you'll definitely need it for the bigger one. I'm using a Tamiya handy drill. I love this thing. It's phenomenal for modeling. If you don't own one, you should probably buy one. It's actually kind of fun. You have to put it together. It comes as a model kit, so you have to clipper it off and screw it all together and put all the gears in. It's a fun little build, but it's good because it has relatively low torque. So it's not just gonna zip through all your models and melt stuff and do horrible things to your models. It's a nice slow drill. It's perfect for hobbying. I've also got these 1/4" disc magnets, hobby knife, clippers, sort of all the generic stuff. And then you need one more piece of equipment that is quite necessary. It's a tube cutter. It consists of a blade and a socket that the tube goes into, and the blade is connected to a screw that you use to tighten it down. So you tighten it down, spin this around the tube, tighten it some more, keep spinning, and you just repeat that until it finally cuts through the tube. It does leave a burr, so you'll have to sand both the inside, either with a file, or I usually just flat sand the whole thing on sandpaper. And then anytime that it's a socket that's going in somewhere, so like these bits on the end, I sanded the outside of these because it does create a burr on the outside, and it's hard to put in through where the hole is drilled and all that stuff. It's just worth it to sand it down and make everything fit nicely. So the sort of reasoning for not just pinning into resin and having a pin that goes in and out regularly. The resin will wear. It can bend. It can do all sorts of stuff. This is just an added durability factor for it. It does make it fit much more snugly, at least for a while. But and it sort of maintains that for longer. But it's also just a extra level of stability for all of the things and keeping everything from breaking. If the pins in here flex too much, you can actually get cracking and just all sorts of nasty stuff. So it's better to have the pins that are going to be holding a lot of those stresses inside of something that is more robust and touching more surface area of the resin. So you're spreading out that load a little bit. Same thing on the other end. So there's sockets that you can see in here. Let's see if I can pull this off one-handed. I couldn't put them on one-handed earlier, but I can take them off one-handed. So you can see there's sockets in there, and we've got the tubing that extends sort of into the body there. It does mess up the interior kit of the Lancer kits. These are going to be closed, so it doesn't really matter. If you want that interior, you probably don't want to do this as a methodology on your knights. It's just not going to be worth it. You're not going to be able to get enough depth in those. You do need about that much to really have it be worthwhile. And even the magnets will probably go through well enough to really render that whole point moot. But for methodology, I drilled the pins in here first, and then I mounted the tubing in. I went ahead and didn't cut it all the way flush with the face here. It will have to be. But the tubing I cut longer and then sanded it flush, and then I glued the pins in. So they are in there after having sanded this flush. Then I added the magnet. I just used a Dremel for that. You could use an appropriate size drill bit. I don't have one hanging around, which is also why I haven't put them in there. I'll have to go find my drill and drill it properly and do all that stuff. That's for later. They hold well enough for now. So yeah, that's kind of the methodology to do it and why I do it and what they're for, and sort of a parts list of stuff that you'll need. For the most part, it's just the correct size brass rods and tubing, and then a cutter for it and something to sand/file with, and your general hobby tools. So that's sort of what and why with it. And one other thing, you're not going to have them interchangeable. They just won't. You'll never get them. Well, you could probably do it if you really wanted to work hard and have static poses and have all sorts of other stuff. They're gonna be. This arm is only gonna go in this shoulder on this model, even though it's magnetized. So it's worthwhile to go ahead and mark them on the inside here, that the only people who will ever see are the ones that are putting it together / taking it apart. So I went ahead and put a Y on here, and you can kind of see it in there. It's kind of dark and not a great thing, but you can see the Y in there. That's so when you're putting it together, okay, that arm goes on that side, just as a little bit of a reminder. So it's a little bit easier to sort of figure out, oh, hey, I'm struggling because this is the wrong arm, not I'm struggling because this doesn't fit. It is worthwhile to go ahead and mark those because they will be all different, and I want these arms to be both dynamic and secure, and removable, which is why I'm going to all this trouble. So, but yeah, that's basically it. You can use this same methodology to make some bearings if you want really movable parts too. Like if you really wanted these knees here, because these are two separate parts when you get it. If you really wanted these knees to be movable for some reason, you could drill into the side here and just drill all the way through that middle. There's a little tongue that's actually part of the bottom here, comes up in between these two pieces that are actually attached to the top. So you could drill sort of all the way through, and then on the interior, the little tongue, you could go ahead and put the brass tubing, and then it'd feed the rod would feed all the way through into the tubing, things like that. It would make a reasonably good bearing for that. Now, I mean, it's not going to be perfectly free going and all that, but it will wear better than the resin would. So anytime you need something to move, you can sort of use that same process and methodology to create bearings too, if you need them. I haven't. It's only come up like twice ever in my sort of modeling career, and I have only used the socketing probably a dozen times in total for all the various models. This is the biggest model I've ever used it on, or that's sort of the biggest, most wide application of it. I'm doing it like 6 times. Usually it's once. It's like, oh hey, I'm gonna be able to swap these two pieces regularly, so I want to make sure that this is done. A lot of times just magnets are enough, but those few times where they aren't, this is worthwhile doing. And the tube cutter is also just a sort of a tool that you should probably have as a hobbyist. The brass tubing, and these work on plastic tubing too, the extruded plastic tubes. I think I have one that I use specifically for. I leave it with all my plastic tubing, just so it cuts faster. These do eventually wear out. I don't use this one that often, but it is getting somewhat dull. It still works just fine, but a nice fresh cutting one I do notice works better. So I have a nice fresh one for my plastic tubes. But yeah, it's a good tool to have. Is really what it is. But yeah, so I hope that sort of answered everybody's questions about the process and what I've been doing, and why on earth I've had goofy smiley faces on the inside of these knights. So yeah, that's that.